Welcome to the third and final part from our Landlord and Investor Seminar. Today we're going to be talking to Joseph Kazabek. He's a paralegal and specializes in the LTV process. This is going to be all about how to evict your tenant. We're going to cover everything you need to know and answer many questions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you require any information going forward, all of my contact info is in the description of this YouTube video. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy. Talk to Joseph Kazabek. He is actually my paralegal that's dealing with a matter for me right now and was referred to me, came very highly recommended. Joseph, are you on right now?
I am.
Okay, so Joseph's going to share some insight into worst case scenario, right? Like, let's say you've done your due diligence and you come across somebody who is not an ideal tenant. Take it away.
Awesome. So the issue with being a landlord is people forget that it's a business, and you need to understand that there's going to be some costs that you're going to incur. The current board is 10 months to a year backlogged, and it's only getting worse. A few months ago, it was 6 months backlogged. This is something we can't control, and there's nothing we can do about it except for ride out the wave. COVID did cause a lot of delays, and it also showed that the tenants have a lot of power just by not paying the rent. Now, we're going to go two different ways. First, let's talk about if you end up with a tenant that's not paying their rent. You know, the very simple N4, L1 process, it takes a year, but you can get them out, or a payment plan that will lead into an eviction process. But as an investor, if you're purchasing a property that has a tenant in it, there are some complicated ways to ensure that you're able to get a good situation. It does take time though. So if you're the buyer and the property that you're looking at has a tenant in it, your two ways of removing that tenant is by using an N12 or an N13. If you're a corporation, you have to use an N13. You can't use an N12. The issue with using an N12 is that you can't rent out that property for 1 year. And what has happened in the past that's caused our current situation was that landlords, big and small, were abusing the process and using an N12 to evict someone and then jacking the rent up as soon as that tenant left. So because of the history, we are now dealing with it. So an N12 means you or your family are going to be moving into that property for a year. It's a very standard form. It's not rocket science. You do a simple L2 application and you wait for the board to come. Now, like I said, we're 10 months behind, and it's not getting better. So you need to look at the long-term gain on this. You're going to lose up front. You're going to have a property that you purchased with a tenant in it, and it might be a lower rental tenant, or you actually might want to use a property for yourself. But you do need to look at the bigger picture. Don't stress about the little bit you're losing now, because in the end, eventually you'll get the property back. Now, instead of looking at the dooms and glooms of having a tenant that is not a very problematic tenant, the ways to deal with problematic tenants, and you can't avoid having them, as you heard Joseph and the other person speaking about it, even some of the best people that have the best credit and the best job, they end up getting a divorce or becoming unemployed, or COVID hits, and then they stop paying their rent. It's unavoidable. But the forms, there is a group that I sent to Carrie, and they are called SOLO, which stands for the Small Ownership Landlords of Ontario. I think they changed the name, but they're a great resource for small landlords. They have forms and self-directions. They also have a panel of paralegals that they endorse. Those paralegals pay to be there, but they endorse them. It's a great resource for small landlords. Now, if you're a corporation, which I'm seeing a lot of right now, you have to use an N13. An N13 is a renovation eviction. In the city of Hamilton, it's becoming a problem, so much that the city of Hamilton has invested in a legal fee fund for tenants to help fight these N13s. So if you're going to use an N13, make sure you're doing it properly and you follow the instructions clearly, because the tenants are coming equipped with lawyers that are there just to find errors in the notice. And then you're going to be waiting another year on top of it. In my office, the one thing that I see and the one thing I get a lot of is landlords coming to me after their hearing saying that their application got kicked out because they checked off the wrong box. And that is true. It is the biggest issue with the board right now with small landlords. Their minor errors are causing applications to be kicked out, and you start over again, start from scratch. So then they come to my office and then they end up retaining me, paying my exorbitant legal fees to do something that could have been dealt with at the first hearing if the board was just a little bit more easier to direct through the complicated applications. So to summarize, I don't like the term problem tenants because all tenants are there to be good in the start. Something does lead to them to having an issue. But also, I don't like the term bad landlords because not all landlord sets out to be a bad landlord. And the current situation, everyone is pitting bad landlords and bad tenants against each other. We need to work together as a group, correct the system, and work on these forms so that landlords, small landlords like the people in attendance today, are understanding what they're doing. It is you can get through it. It's not rocket science, but that's why I'm here. I'm always here to help you.
Joseph, what do you see for the future of the LTV and maybe being able to correct these wait times and this just utter chaos that's happening there?
So the government has come out saying that they're investing more money into it to hire more adjudicators. But the true issue that I find with the board, and in my office, I do represent tenants and landlords. I play for whoever's paying me. The issue at the board is that the unrepresented people that attend don't understand what they're doing, and it causes a delay in a hearing block. A block is designed to hear a set amount of cases, and what you'll see is one case will take over the entire block because they're having technical issues with the Zoom links or the upload system. So in my opinion, the only way to resolve this issue is to go back to the old ways of in-person hearings. I'm not a fan of technology.
Do you see, I'm obviously biased because I'm a landlord, so I am, but do you see any changes to the regulations? Because I look at, what I'm finding is tenants that are paying their rent, that are problem tenants, professional tenants, their claim is that housing should be, available to everybody for free. It is what it is. But I look at it as theft, and it's not. And this is really bothering me because I can't walk into a store and say, food is a basic right. I'm just going to take your fucking food and not pay you, and then not have any repercussions. What, in terms of, that changing, what do you see for that? And are there any options to, sue your tenants if they're not paying? Or I believe, Mr. Trombetta, we were talking about how you could do a judgment, right? Place a judgment for unpaid rent. Can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so after a landlord correctly gets through the board and gets their hearing dealt with, and they get an order from the board, they take that order, that paper that the board gives you, to the small claims, because the landlord tenant board has a maximum that they can award, and small claims has that same maximum. So that's the court system you follow through. You go there, you move your landlord tenant board order to a small claims order. Now this is paper, and I say this in a very open way of explaining it, but there's a reason why these people are tenants. And a lot of times you'll find that the landlords, their legal fees will cost as much as what's owed to them in the end. So you take your order to small claims, you file it to small claims, it costs you another $100, and then you file for an examination, but you need to know where the tenant moved to. So then once you know that, you file for an examination, that costs you another $150, and then you get the information. So then you have to file for a garnishment, so that costs you another $250. And then that tenant changes their bank account, so then you have to take them back to the examination to file for another garnishment. So you can see the cycle. It's 100 here, 100 there, and it starts to add up. Now, you made mention about people don't think they should pay rent. Mm-hmm. I think the issue is that this is beyond our little circle, that housing is a human right, mm-hmm. but it also comes down to a government side. So there are affordable housing, there are groups that do provide it, and the government is having issues with keeping it up or being able to provide it, and it shouldn't be falling on the backs of the small landlords. The average rental in Hamilton is $22 to $26 or even up to $2,800 for a 2 or 3 bedroom small house. Majority of people can't afford that on minimum wage, but that's not the small landlords obligation to provide affordable housing.
Hmm.
It's a government's job
It
to
is
provide that.
the government's job.
And
Well,
the issue is that the government's not supporting small landlords, but they're also not supporting struggling tenants. And that's what's pitting small landlords and struggling tenants against each other.
Can I ask a question to you, Joseph, regarding when you see a problem tenant at the beginning? Because I've seen, and I'm sure you have as well, Carrie, and you too, Joe. I'm sure you've seen it all across the board, a variety of different approaches. Like I always found having a conversation works best, making sure then after that, if that doesn't go favorably, have everything in writing. How do you feel about cash for keys?
So that leads into my next part.
Okay. I just wanted to throw that one out there.
Now, before we start this conversation, remember, this isn't legal advice in any way. This is just me.
I knew that was coming. It's not. No, but I mean, this is also an open forum where we've all seen a variety of different things happen. And the worst thing that can happen is you have a tenant that doesn't pay rent, because this is a business ultimately for anybody who chooses to invest. And it's transactional. So we're both providing something. I'm providing you a place to stay within the rules and regulations of our local municipality, and you're providing the payment for this contractual agreement we have, which is very one-sided in the province of Ontario. It's very tenant-sided and not landlord.
So we'll agree to disagree on the balance of the landlord-tenant board, because I can't comment on that. But to answer the question about the cash or keys, my office, I do regularly handle cash or keys, probably 2 to 3 a month. When I first started getting into these cash or key agreements, the average buyout was $5,000, $6,000, and this was pre-COVID. It usually amounted to 2 to 3 months rent. Now the issue that COVID caused, and also the mortgage rates and a whole cluster of events that occurred, is that the rental properties are very hard to find these days.
Yes.
Not because the properties aren't available, is because landlords are being extra cautious. So it is difficult to get into a rental property unless you have a good job, good credit, blah, blah, blah. Now, cash for key situation now, my office, our average is $20,000 to $30,000. And that's for a 2 or 3 bedroom property. And the reason why that price has gone up is because of COVID resale values. The housing market exploded during COVID. People were getting $300,000-$400,000 over asking, and tenants seen that. And also people wanted vacant possessions. So if you wanted to sell your house for $400,000 over asking, you're going to pay that tenant anything that tenant wanted to get a vacant possession, which caused a situation that the Law Society even, I believe, got involved in a few cases where the cash for keys, the amount was so high that it was unreasonable.
Wow.
So I do believe cash for keys is a great way to resolve an issue and avoid court, but you need to both have reasonable expectations and clean hands.
Joseph,
Yeah.
You're a paralegal. Wouldn't this also, if a tenant approached you with something like this, wouldn't this also, in the eyes of the law, be called extortion in some way?
And that's why some governing bodies got involved in a few recent cash for keys situations that I've seen. They weren't in my offices, but I've seen them. The issue is that it's a without prejudice conversation. So when you're having these conversations, it's a backroom deal. And yes, it may fall under extortion under landlord's eyes, but it's about mitigating your damages. Last month, I had 3 clients that 2 lost a sale of a property, and both of their sales, there's agreements, so they incurred $40,000 in legal fees. So in hindsight, it would have been cheaper to pay the tenant the $30,000 that they wanted instead of paying $40,000 and losing your house sale. Yeah, so one can say it's extortion, but one would say that is mitigating potential damages by minimizing the cost of your financial obligations or your liabilities. And also a side issue with this is that, and I say this, I'm not sure how many realtors are in the room. I say this nicely, but also I'm seeing a lot of cases where the realtors are pushing the sale through and the sellers may not fully understand the vacant possession. And then they're coming to my office saying, holy shit, the house sale closes in a week. I need this tenant out.
And that's why I've opened this seminar up to realtors as well, because I don't think that they fully understand the process and the dangers about selling a tenanted home. But also a lot of them are doing leases, and honestly, they don't know what the F they're doing. It's embarrassing. And
well, also, sorry for cutting you off. You'll see the recent changes under the Law Society have made it so that unlicensed people cannot handle these forms. So they can't handle notices and 12s and 13s and 4s because of the issues that we're having in the past with forms not being done correctly. And realtors were just jumping in and issuing N12s. House sales were going through, and then it was a shit storm after.
okay, so hold on. So realtors can no longer, or you have to be licensed to deal with those forms?
So under the Law Society changes, only a licensee of the Law Society can do the notices. So N12s and 13s, L1 and L2 applications have to be done by either the homeowner or a licensee.
Okay.
And I'll still see some realtors issuing notices and they just won't sign them.
When did that go through, Joseph?
So the changes happened in the last year.
Okay.
I don't know the exact date, but it was post-COVID.
Okay. Yeah, I don't ever remember receiving notification on that from our board.
No, it came from the Law Society. Yeah.
Like that's something that should have all been sent out to us, and that is not something that I knew of. And I like to pride myself on being fairly current with this stuff.
The excluded to that is that if the person directly works for the landlord. So property managers were getting in trouble with this because they managed multiple properties.
Yeah.
And the way around it was that they would have to only manage one property, that apartment building, directly.
Wow.
And that was an exception. I would suggest is to ensure, if you're going to do this yourself and not retain representation, to read the instructions that the board provides. The board does provide very clear instructions with each application, and a simple box not being checked off can cause a 12-month delay in your hearing.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question to you, Joseph? Do you offer a service where you can walk a potential landlord through the process without you doing the whole process? Like, do you have a tiered service available to potential landlords?
Yeah, so most legal offices have a block service. Okay. Where if you just want assistance with the application itself,
yep.
You pay one fee if you want help with just the filing, or if you just want a hearing service. But to be honest, in majority of the situations, if you're going to hire someone to assist you with the application, it's worth the extra few hundred to go to the hearing. Okay. Because once you get to the hearing, there's further disclosure requirements, and it still is technical right to the end.
Okay, so have you seen an increase, or is it leveling out, or even a decrease with issues? So
because we're facing, or we're in a new age where there's a lot of bad faith applications, there's a lot of N12s and N13s. It is getting more complicated because we're involving bylaw now into the landlord tenant board on building plans and regulations. So I do, depending on if you're going for a basic N4, N5, those are simple. Is when you're getting the N12s and the N13s, when you have to explain the renovations you're doing to the building, explaining the long-term construction, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Would you say that essentially for a landlord, getting an N11 signed by both parties with a set move-out date is probably the best way to go if you can pull it off?
So an N11 is the best way to resolve the matter and avoid further court, not only because of the cost of going to the tribunal, but the delay. What you'll have is a lot of times you can do a perfect application and your notices can be on point, and then you'll get to the hearing block and it will get adjourned because the block has 20 people in 5 hours to be heard. So if you can avoid going to the tribunal and both parties are equally unhappy with an N11, then that's the desirable outcome.
Yeah, and wouldn't that, so if you get an N11 signed by the tenant and yourself, obviously you file it. I'm not really sure how because I've hired you to do everything. But in that case, the case of the tenant not moving out on the date specified in the N11, is it still the same process of getting a hearing, or does it get a lot easier?
So
can I just interject? For anyone who doesn't know, can you please tell us what an N11 is?
Oh, sure. So
we're just assuming that everybody here knows what we're talking about.
Sorry.
We should at some point open it up too for anybody to ask questions.
Yeah.
So an N11 is a notice between parties to mutually agree to terminate your tenancy on a set date.
Thank you.
If it's signed by both parties, you file it to the tribunal. Now, if it's questionable N11, it could end up in a hearing. But in most cases, it gets put into an ex parte where it's not a hearing. The board just issues an order, and if the tenant doesn't vacate, you go to the sheriff. If the tenant wants to argue that they were strong-armed into an N11, then it can go to a hearing.
And do we need to hire you to do an N11, or is that only an N12 and N13?
No, an N11 is a simple form that you both sign, and then you file it with the N2.
Okay.
Now, when you're getting to a cash or key situation, which N11s usually go with, that's when you use an office to assist on it, because those full and finals can be complicated.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Joseph, also, isn't there a percentage of the down payment outlined by the LTV that a seller is supposed to pay to the tenants aside from side note negotiations?
No, the board doesn't have any rules on what kind of additional compensation outside of the board's basic understanding of 1 month, 3 month, as per the instructions on the N12 or N13.
And here's how you have to look at it. If you buy a property right now and you can cover your costs and make a little bit of money on a rental, going forward, how is it going to be when the rates equalize themselves out a little bit? And this is what I try to tell my people as buyers and investors. Real estate is a long game. So what we have experienced the last 2.5 to 3 years is not normal. And a lot of money was made that we have not experienced probably in any of our lifetimes with how properties have increased in value. So if you can buy something right now, and I don't know, like Carrie, I'm sure you've seen it as well. There's a lot of properties out there that are in the neighborhoods, like the B and C neighborhoods, or that are gentrifying, that the buy-in is massively affordable now. And it is what it should have been. And now people can put the money in there and turn it into a duplex or a triplex and still be making their end cap on it. That's what I'm saying.
Basically, we have you covered, whether you need to purchase property, sell property that's tenanted, purchase income property, you need lending for your properties or income properties. If you need legal advice on how to, deal with tenants legally, we've got you covered.